Hi, welcome back to the channel. This video is a compilation of a series of videos that we posted to YouTube documenting the building of an extension that was completed recently. The slides you can see here summarize what each video included, and if you want more detail on any of the build aspects, then go to our channel and check out the extended highlights on each individual video. Hopefully this series of videos will give you some ideas and show you the way that we have done this extension, and maybe will be helpful to you when you're planning and building your own project. If you like what you see, then please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and we hope you enjoy this compilation. So let's start with site setup, because there's a few issues with this house. Now the property itself, you can see arrowed here, is the middle property in the white, and it is a mid-terraced house, and that means that it doesn't have any side access, so it's not possible to get to the back garden by going down either side of the property. The only way to get to the extension at the rear is actually to walk through the property, and that causes us a few issues because it means that all of the materials that we need for the job will have to be transported through the house. All of the waste that we're producing at the back of the property as we're digging out and doing various things will have to be transported back through the property out of the front door, and that all of the site setup and materials and everything we need for the job will need to be stored at the front of the property. So you can see here there's a delivery being done. But in terms of site setup, we need to have a toilet on site so the guys are not using the homeowner's toilet facilities, and we need to have a skip for all of the removal of the waste. So this is a cross section of the house, and as you can see at the rear there is an existing extension which has a flat roof and is around about 3 meters deep. And the plan here is to double the size of this extension. So we'll be adding an additional 3 meters, which you can see in this diagram. So here's a comparison of the two floor plans. The one on the left is the existing property, and the one on the right is the property as it will be once the construction is completed. Existing extension has been built on top of a live sewer. This is quite common in England, where sewers often run across the back of properties. Now this property is a mid-terrace, so that means that it's got houses on either side of it. It's adjoined on either side. And the line you can see running through the middle of the extension that the kitchen is linked into is actually the live sewer. Now the first job was to remove the paving slabs that were previously in the back garden. This was a patio that was sitting outside the old extension. So we're breaking it up with the Kango just to make it loose, and then we're having to shovel it all and put it into these buckets. But you can see here it's quite a laborious process. This ground is relatively hard. It's not solid concrete, but it's still compacted over the years, so it does take quite a lot of time to break up the ground. Moving through to the front of the property, I thought it was worth showing you the skip, because obviously as you're digging out the earth at the rear of the property, it's having to go somewhere, and the problem you have is once the skip's full, then you have to stop work until you can replace it with the next skip. It's estimated that when you remove earth from the ground, so compacted soil, that it increases in volume by 30%. So you need to take account of what you're taking out of the ground and how often you're going to need to change your skip over. If you've watched the first video, you'll know that we mentioned there was an air raid shelter previously in this back garden built in World War II, and we have actually found the concrete construction of that as part of the dig for the foundations. I thought I'd just show it here because it's quite interesting. Here's an image of what the Anderson air raid shelters looked like. So here we are with the trench almost completed. We're having to be careful with this section on the left because there's a wall between the two gardens. We don't want that to collapse as we dig down underneath it. But the trench is now almost complete. You can see it does have water sitting at the bottom of it. That's predominantly because it's been raining quite heavily. You can see the ground's quite muddy. Jumping forward again, this is now the finished version of the trench. So this is ready for building control sign off. You can see the section here where the old air raid shelter entrance was. We've removed that now. And there is a little bit of water sitting at the bottom, but it's draining away slowly. This is really just some rainfall, so it's not groundwater that's going to cause a problem with the foundations. We're quite lucky here. There's no large trees or any other issues around this area that would cause us to have to dig down further or do anything more drastic. Building control have now been out and approved the trench. They're happy for us to lay the foundation, to pour the concrete. So here we are a bit later on the same day, and you can see that the concrete has now been poured on the left hand side of the trench. So that's the finished level that we're aiming for the foundation. So it's literally just a case of constantly mixing up bags of sand and cement, waiting for the mixture to be ready, and then pouring it in and joining up all the foundations as we go along. Here we are a few hours later as the concrete started to set. So you can see here we've installed a bridge. This is because we're going to have to put some drainage pipes in here. So we've had to leave a gap so that we can put the drainage through, and that's because there's a manhole in the original extension, but we can come on to that in later videos. You see the Kango now having a rest after doing all the hard work earlier. But you can see the concrete has now started to set and form in place. This section here we're pouring later because of the wall that's adjoining between the two gardens. If we'd have dug all of that out and at the same time, there's a chance that that wall would have collapsed. And here's a shot from the garden looking back at the property, so you can start visualizing what the extension will be like. Obviously that wall will come out where the window and the sliding door is, so it's going to be much bigger than what you can see here. This is actually just the 3-meter addition that we're doing, but the finished job will be a full 6-meter long new extension. And moving on to the very final section, we've now completed all of the concrete pour. The darker part in the corner here is freshly poured, so that's the last section that's been done, and that's gone in, and now everything is ready to go off to set and for us to start building the actual extension itself. We've lifted up the floor from the old extension, so these are the joists that were holding that floor up, and here's the manhole that was sitting underneath the old extension. And as we zoom in, you can see the water that's running. If you look at the section of pipe that's running from left to right, you can see there's water running across that. Now that's actually coming from further up the road, from the houses that are higher up on this run of sewer. You can just see the start of the sewer pipe there. If you look down, there it is there. So that sewer pipe is running all the way down the road. That's for everybody on this road, all the houses. You just saw in the graphic, I drew that black line. So that's the live pipe. So we need to be careful of that, because if we cause damage to that pipe, then all the sewage that's coming from the houses above us on the road will start to empty into this hole, and obviously we don't want that. That would be an absolute disaster. We left a small channel. We put 2 pieces of timber in when we were putting the concrete into the foundations, and this is really to allow a rodding access pipe to be put into the garden. So we're going to have to run that from the sewer that you saw inside all the way under the additional 3 meters of extension that we're adding onto the property, and then beyond this point, so to the right of the picture you can see here, we'll have to put a small manhole cover into the garden, which would be the rodding access. That would be where you'd be able to go in and clear any blockage that builds up. So we're having to dig down so that the pipe can run flush, and we're able to get that access in. Back inside, and you can see the live pipe is still bringing water through, and then the 2 pipes at the top here on the left, the white ones, they're coming from inside the house. So that's the sewer and drainage arrangement as it is currently. This arrangement will stay in place for the existing house and the existing sewer, and all we're doing here really is adding an access rodding point under this portion here where we can see we've been digging under the wall. So that's the main objective here, is to break through this wall, dig down that channel that we're digging outside, to be able to lay a pipe to access this sewer and be able to rod and clear any blockages in the future. Okay, so it's now time to make the connections. Now you can see there are 3 pipes here that we have capped off. So the one between the guy's legs is actually the live sewer pipe. So we've put a plug on that So that means that anything that's coming live down that pipe will just be sitting in the pipe for the time being, which means we've only got a short period of time to be able to do this work, because otherwise all the sewage will back up for the other people and could cause a major problem. So as soon as you cut the sewer pipe, you've really got to be focused on what you're doing and get the job done quickly and efficiently, because you're stopping the live sewage coming through from the rest of the road. So we're having to remove the old clay pipe here, and we're going to replace the clay pipe with new plastic pipework. But now it's really important to make sure that we get really good connections on all of this drainage, because this is all going to be buried underneath the extension. We're going out a further 3 meters. So this is going to be about 4 or 5 meters into the house. So you don't want to ever have to come back and dig this up and do any work on this. So this is basically fit and forget time. We're going to put this in and it's never going to be accessed again. Apart from that rodding access that we're putting in, the manhole cover will be closed off and there won't be any opportunity to come and dig all this up again in the future. This is just a case of laying all the pipework and then connecting it all up before we release that cap on the sewer and let it go live again. And here we are with the final setup. So you can see that we've got the 2 connections coming from the house, which are at the bottom here. We've got the main sewer pipe, which is running straight across. So we've cut that section out and replaced it with long-standing plastic. So that'll be good for at least the next 100 years. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the old clay pipe where we've connected into. So this is the new drainage arrangement. And the whole reason we've had to do this was solely to provide rodding access in the garden. Now this work has been completed, the next stage for us is to get building control out to sign off on this. So they're coming tomorrow to check all these connections and that they're happy with the quality of the pipe and all of the way it's been constructed. You can see here that we're laying the engineering bricks first, and we'll do a course of around 5 high. And these bricks, especially designed, they're much stronger than a standard house brick, and they also have much lower water absorption. So it means that they're really good at dealing with environments where there is frost and water attack. So if we have a quick look over on the left hand side here, we can see that the damp proof course level has now been completed. So we've got 5 courses of engineering bricks. You can see on the right hand side here we've got 2 layers of bricks. So we've got the furthest away one is the external wall, then we will put some insulation in the gap, and then the second layer of bricks is the internal wall. So this will all be below ground level. So if you look at the house, you can see the doorway is much higher. So this is basically round about the finished floor level. So all of this will be underground. We'll have a patio that will come out from the property itself. So these bricks will not be visible, these engineering bricks. We have started to construct the external walls. So you can see this one is partly constructed, and we're using the bricks that match the original house bricks themselves. Now these are more expensive, but it's a requirement of planning and building control that you have bricks that match the look of the original house, so that's fine. But here is the damp proof membrane. So you can see the black section on the external wall, and that damp proof membrane has been laid all the way around the top of the external engineering bricks. So we've laid that before we've started applying the bricks on top. So you can see it runs, if you look closely, you can see that black line runs all the way across to each corner. And here we are a little later on, and you can now start to see the extension taking shape. So the wall on the right hand side has now been built up to the level that we're looking for to put the lintel across the top. So this big section that we haven't built into is going to be the bifold doors, and we're going to have to put a lintel from one side to the other to make sure that the roof has enough support. And jumping forward now, this is now completed. So these external walls have all been put to their final height. So you can see we've got a slight lowering of the sections on the inside where the bifold doors will be, and that's where the lintel is going to come straight across and sit on top of that. So we're going to put that lintel in before we finish everything finally. Here's some blocks now. So we'll be doing the internal walls in blocks. So block work is cheaper to buy and cheaper to lay, so it makes absolute sense to put that on the internal wall. Absolutely standard construction for any project. As we mentioned in the last video, block work is much cheaper to complete than brickwork. The blocks are bigger, they're lighter, they cover more space, and they're easier to construct. So we put blockwork on the inside, and as you can see, we've got insulation between the blockwork and the brickwork, and that's a requirement of building regs, but also is a requirement if it's your house, because you want to have as much insulation as possible. You want to keep the heat that you're generating internally inside the property. So this is basically cavity wall insulation. Looking back towards the house, you can see that we've now removed the original extension rear wall. So this is now showing you the full length of this extension. So this is the full 6 meters. So if you look up, you can see that we've started preparing the roof structure for the steel beam. So we're going to put a steel beam across the top here, which will sit on top of the block walls, and then we will fix the 2 sets of rafters into that steel beam on either side to give that roof the full support. So if we look now a bit later on, you can see the block work has now been completed. So all the way across the top of that gap, the blocks have been built on top of the lintel. So that's the final structure. Obviously we'll plaster it before it's completely finished. And you can also see there are some bricks sitting on top of the blocks, and they're the bricks that will be applied to the outside of that structure to match the brickwork on the external walls. Jumping up from a different angle, we're now starting to prepare the roof for the arrival of the steel beam. So this is the old extension roof. You can see that we've stripped back the old covering, so the plyboard is now visible. And what we're going to do is prepare all of these timbers, so all the ceiling joists that are in place from the old extension. We need to make sure that they're good enough to be able to be used in the new extension roof, and that everything's level and that we don't have any issues with regards to the roof potentially holding water in the future. So we need to make sure it looks like one perfect continuous roof. And this is the steel itself. So it's about 5 meters long. It's not particularly heavy. You can see it's relatively thin. So it's a 4-man lift, we think, and we're going to have to carry this all the way through the house. So it's a case of literally picking it up, having 4 people all the way across the whole beam, and then just carrying it through. So we're just feeding it here through the living room window, and then if we cut to the inside, we're literally going to have to just carry this through to the back of the extension. So we're dealing with the usual health and safety issues, but in addition to that, we're also having to be careful because this is the homeowner's living room and kitchen, so we want to make sure we don't accidentally damage any of the existing property. So it's just a case of lifting this up. As we said before, it's not particularly heavy, so it's relatively easy. We don't need any mechanical equipment. Sometimes you would have a winch on site, or if it was a really big steel, you may have to get it craned in over the top of the house. But we don't need to do any of that in this situation because it's relatively light, this beam, so it's pretty easy to manhandle, which is what we're doing here. And then it's literally just a case of putting it in situ. So we've prepared the wall for where it's going, and then it's just a case of maneuvering this into position. So relatively straightforward. And then what we'll need to do is some timber work to make sure that all of these joists that are existing from the old roof fit snugly into that position. So if we have a look at it from the other angle, you can see here easily now how the joists fit into the I-beam. So you can see in the central section, if you look just close to where this pipe is, where the guy's standing, we've cut out the top section of the beam. So you can see where he's standing and the one next to it. We've cut a little notch into that, and that's just making sure that it's really tight fitting into the I-beam itself, because this is basically the support for the whole of the roof. So this I-beam here will keep that end of the roof stable, make sure there's no movement, and then we'll just need to fit in the new joists afterwards into the other side as well. You can see that we've put 4 joists in, and we've started putting the noggins in. So you can see at the far end above the lintel, the far 2 joists have cross sections coming across them, and that's really to give the roof rigidity. You can see that we've now installed all of the new joists right the way across from the beam to this back section of the house here. So you can see we haven't put the bricks in yet in the lintel, so the front edge of the lintel, we still haven't inserted those bricks. And that's because we want to get all of this work done first and foremost. Get the joists in place, get the roof structure constructed as we need it to be, and then we can finish off towards the end by putting in the bricks and making sure we've got the right levels, and then we'll finish up with our guttering. And you can see in the steel beam we put some noggins in here in between each of the old rafters, so we're just making sure we've got the right spacings and that everything's strong and isn't going to move and give us any problems. Jumping up onto the roof itself, so we've now got all of the timbers in place, so all of the joists are in place. So the next part of the job for us here is to construct the roof lights, and then we can start putting the final finish onto the roof itself. Jumping forward a little, you can now see the construction of the roof light itself is starting to take shape. So we're building that up. That will actually come out and will be a raised structure on top of the roof, which will be set at an angle to make sure that the piece of glass that we put on the top has got runoff, and basically water runs off it and doesn't pool or sit on there. And we're now starting to put the actual covering on the roof itself. Just looking at what's happening here, we're literally just cutting all of the plyboard out to size. So this is being fitted on top of the joist. So this is basically the start of our roof structure. So we're just putting this down, and then we'll have a membrane and the insulation, and then the top layer, and then the waterproofing will go on top of that. We need to fit this down securely, really tight, make sure we've got the right fall, that we've got a slight fall from back to front so that the water will run away from the house, and that we can then have everything going towards the gutters. So this is a really important part of the job, getting the levels right. Now that we've done the initial plyboard structure, it's a case of putting down some membrane and the insulation. So as I mentioned before, warm deck roof, this has got 150 mil of insulation. This is rigid form insulation. You can see we are fitting a complete barrier of insulation right the way across the whole roof here. So these come in large pieces. They're 2.4 meters long. So ideally you want to minimize the amount of cuts. So get as many of the big pieces in as you can. And then we'll be taping all of this together to give us a complete barrier. So moving into the inside of the house, looking up through the roof light, you now start getting a feel as to what this will look like internally. So you can see the build up that we've created on the roof itself. So as you look up towards the sky, we'll have a single piece of glass. So the view you can see there will be pretty similar to what you'll see when it's finished. Just looking at it from the other side, looking back towards the house, you can get a feel for the scale of it. It's quite a big roof light. It's going to bring a lot of light into the whole of the building. So not just in the extension, but into the whole building itself. You can see the slope here. You can actually see the angle that we've cut into that wood, which will be, when the glass goes on top of that, that will then form the runoff that the water will automatically run off that roof and away from the building. So looking at the finished roof structure now, all the insulation's in place, everything's been fitted. So you can see we've cut it around the boiler flue and the downpipe, which is coming off the roof, and obviously all around the new roof light structure. So this roof is now done at this stage. The next stage for us is obviously to make sure that this is all taped together and jointed and completely sealed, and that there are no gaps and everything's nice and efficient. And then we will start the construction of the top layer. The next stage after the insulation goes on is to fit plyboard on top of that insulation. So you can see the guys here have got the sheets of plyboard on site, and now they're just making sure everything is completely square before they start fixing it on top. So you've got to make sure the first piece is perfect, and then every other piece will follow from that. And then it's a case of screwing all of this plyboard down into the joist. So the ceiling joist, the rafters, have been set in the structure itself, and we need to find those, and we will screw down through. So you can see the guy's got the drill here, and he's got very long screws, and basically you're screwing all the way down to keep this firmly in place. You can see that we're just putting the ply all the way across the roof. So here we are a little bit further on, and all of the ply is now in place. So all of the structure has been completed. So this is all of the construction. but now we need to move to the waterproofing, and that's obviously the critical part. So we've had to make sure that we've got a fall on this roof. So we're falling away from the house. So there is a defined slope on this structure. Obviously it looks very flat when we're looking down on it here, but this roof has a pronounced 4-degree fall from the house to the edge of the structure. And that's really important when you're building a flat roof. They should never ever be flat. They should never be perfectly flat, because obviously water will then sit on top of it. So you have to have a slope to encourage the water to run away. So we're now on to the time-lapse video for the installation of the felt itself. So you can see that we've got the upstand for the roof light. So we prepared that first. We put some bitumen around there and just made it waterproof. And now we're applying a waterproof membrane. So there's going to be 3 coats to this roof. We're going to have waterproof membrane on the bottom, then we're going to have an underlay as the middle coating, and then we'll have the felt as the top coating. So that's 3 layers of waterproofing, which should mean that this roof will be good for at least the next 20 years. So you can see that we've got the first layer down already. Now we're putting down the undercoat. So this is essentially with overlapping, so you can see where the joints are. They're in different places for the 2 different surfaces, so we don't have consecutive joints on top of one another, so it makes it more difficult for the water to actually penetrate through if you haven't got all of your jointing sitting directly above each other. Very simple, basic roofing technique. But these things are important, and you need to make sure that you understand why it's being done. So that's the purpose of these videos, is to really give everybody an opportunity to have a look at how these things are prepared, so that when you're doing your project, you'll be able to make sure that everything's being done correctly, or if it's being done differently, that the guys doing it can explain to you exactly why they're doing exactly what they're doing. So we've now got the felt to be applied. So just preparing the edge before we do that. So just trimming everything off and making sure that it's nice and square. And then it's just a case of laying the felt in the opposite direction. So you can see that this is coming on at 90 degrees to the 2 joints that we had previously, and that's giving us an additional layer of comfort in terms of the waterproofing, because water has now got to make its way through a lot of different ways to get down through the ceiling, so hopefully it will never happen. So you can see we're just torching this on using the gas burner to melt the undersurface of the felt, which is basically plastic. And as you heat that, it becomes soft and malleable, and as you roll it out, it sticks down to the roof. And once it's in place, it's not going anywhere. It's actually quite difficult to remove. So once that's torched on and fitted, then this is the finished surface for this roof. So you can see there's a bit of tidying up around the edges and making sure that everything's been jointed correctly, and we've finished off all the sides, and essentially making sure that the water is going to run in the right direction and not pool on this roof, which is what you're looking to avoid with all flat roofs. You don't want water to be sitting there to be able to freeze and cause any problems going forward. So that's the main roof done, and then we had to come back and sort out the roof light. So that was a bit more detail and a bit more preparation, and obviously the drip edge there. So the right hand side of the property, we just finished doing all the edging on that, which is clearly important. You can see that we've lapped it up a little bit so that the water will not just run off the edge, but it will run down towards the end of the extension rather than just flowing straight over. Again, very simple, basic flat roofing technique to make sure you can direct the water down to the gutter, which will sit across the bottom of the extension once everything is in place. So now we're just doing some work on the upstand for the roof light. So you can see that we're applying all of the felt around there, cutting small pieces and actually blow torching it on. So exactly the same process that we did for the flat roof itself, but we're now building it all around the upstand. Bit of tarp over the plyboard, and then we're basically done. So this roof is now completely finished, watertight, and we've got to put some guttering on the bottom later, but essentially the felt roof is now completed. So a soakaway is something that is required as part of building regulations. So building control will usually make you construct a soakaway as part of an extension project. And basically what it does is it separates the rainwater that builds up on your roof from the foul water that's going through your drains. So it's basically designed to stop the drain system being overwhelmed with water that could run off and be used in the garden. So it's not foul water, it's water that's come from the sky, and building control would prefer you to be able to accommodate that on your land and let it just go back into the water system. So we've had to build one here, and the size of your soakaway is calculated by the size of your roof. So there's a relatively complicated calculation that's done that looks at the square meterage of your roof and then calculates how deep and wide and long your soakaway needs to be to accommodate the worst case scenario storm water that builds up on that roof. So we're digging out ours here, and it's 2 meters long, 1 meter wide and 1 meter deep. And here are the crates that we'll be putting into it. So the idea is with your soakaway, once you've dug out the big hole, is that you should put things in there that are porous. So this is what the industry standard is. So these are plastic crates that are entirely hollow. So you can see through them. They're basically quite strong, but they will hold water. So once the soakaway hole is filled with these crates, it's basically a big hollow structure that can hold a lot of water. So when that storm water comes off the roof, you can accommodate it in the soakaway under the ground, and then eventually that water will dissipate and disappear back into the soil around it. So you can see it's got round sections here that you can put the pipe into as you feed it down from the roof itself. We're now getting to the point where we've dug out the exact dimensions. This will be signed off by building control. They'll confirm that they're happy that it's the right dimensions to match the size of the roof, and then we will fill it with the crates and then basically put some soil over the top, and then we'll re-turf the garden. So it needs to be a minimum of 5 meters from the end of the extension. So we've built this 5 meters away. So coming back from the house now, you can see the distance that it's set back. This is actually after we've finished filling the hole with the crates and putting the soil on top. So as we walk here, this section here that we're now approaching is the soakaway itself. So it's 5 meters away. So it's quite a long way from the house itself. But you can see now we filled it all back in. We put the soil back on top. We obviously need to put some turf on top of that. And now we will have to pipe it all up. So we're going to have to put the pipework on the roof for the guttering. And then we will be connecting the pipe to the crates that are underneath the ground. So we're having to dig out a trench now, a channel from where the soakaway is located back to the house, and then we'll put the pipework into that channel, into that trench, connect it all up, and then it will all be underground and will never be seen again. So you can see the joint system he's got there in the corner. So this will sit underground. So that pipe that's coming out on the front there will be underground and will be connected through a series of underground pipes to that soakaway. So we're just fitting that now. There is going to be a patio put on this ground here. The area that he's standing on will actually be raised up as a patio. So all the work we're doing now is going to be buried underground. You won't see it once the work is all completed, the patio's in place and the garden is put back to the way it should be for the homeowners. So you need to make sure that when you're building your trench, when you're digging it, it's on an angle, on a fall, so that it will go and run away smoothly, because the design is if there's a lot of water on that roof, if you've got a storm and it's producing really heavy rainfall, then it needs to be able to flow rapidly down the downpipe, through these pipes that you can see here that will be buried underground, and into that crate system that we just showed you in the soakaway under the ground. The big 2 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter hole is where all that water is going to end up, and then it will start to sink into the ground. So you can see here that we've actually got spirit level to make sure that we've got sufficient fall on those pipes to make sure that the water will run off quickly when it starts coming down through the system. So here's the pipe from the other angle. So we fed it all the way through. So we've backfilled this section at the top of the picture. So that's already been done. and now we're just connecting all of the pipes that go through all the way to the crate system that's sitting in the soakaway itself. So we've got two elements to the floor structure. We've got the subfloor and we've got the floating floor. So you can see here that we're getting the timber ready to construct the floating floor, but the subfloor is basically the ground level. So that's the ground that we built on top of. Now, if you've watched the previous videos, you'll know that we had a lot of work to do on the drainage system. We had a live sewer that runs underneath this property, so we had to put a junction in to be able to rod that in the event of it being blocked in the future. And then we've covered all of the drainage with pea shingle, and now we've concreted on top of it. So it's completely locked into the ground, which is why it was really important to get everything approved by building control, signed off, and then buried. So you can see here the concrete's been set. That's now in place. That's going to be there for the rest of all time. And you can see we put some damp-proof membrane round the bottom of the block structure, and that's to stop rising damp, to prevent water from rising up from the ground and coming through into the property and causing damp issues and problems in the future. So this has all been signed off by building control. This concrete's still wet. We've only just laid it, but it's setting. So we're now starting to work on the floor structure. So you can see here the guys now are starting to construct the floating floor. So where they're standing is on top of the concrete we were just looking at that was wet, which is now all set. But you can see here, because we've got a concrete floor and we've got a solid sub base, we're able to actually build up the floor structure by using timber on top of the brick structure that's been set. So if you watch these videos, you'll know that this extension is actually an extension of an old small extension. So the section across the middle here that's got the timber was actually the previous brick wall of the house, the end of the old extension. So we've utilized that to be able to support the floating floor. So it will be suspended from joist hangers around the edges, but because we've got this structure in the middle and we've also got something at the end by the doors that we're constructing, then we're using that to give it extra solidity and make sure that it's nice and firm and strong structure. So you can see the gap that has been left underneath the floating floor, and that will allow circulation of air and ventilation and make sure that there's no condensation and damp building up underneath the floor. So we'll make sure that it's cross ventilated, that air can move around and moisture can get out from this floor as well. And we've left the spaces in between. This is going to be filled with insulation. Here we are now onto the insulation. So you can see that it's very similar to wall and ceiling insulation that's used in a loft conversion, if you've watched any of those videos. So this is the rigid insulation, provides really good insulative capacity. It's really strong and just retains a lot of heat from the homeowner's point of view. So we're literally just cutting this with a saw, fitting it tightly into place in between all of the different gaps in the flooring. Here we are a bit later on, so we put more of the insulation in. So you can see that most of the floor insulation is now in place. So we will be closing this off shortly because this insulation is quite delicate. If you stand on it or you drop something on it, it will get damaged. So once the insulation's put down, you really need to close the floor off as quickly as possible. So jumping forward again, here we are now that the floor has started to be closed off. So we're using chipboard here because we will be tiling this later. And this video, we're focusing on the first fix, electric and plumbing. So there's not going to be anything particularly sexy in this video because this is all about wiring and pipes and planning. But it is really important part of the process, and it's really critical for you when you're designing your project to make sure that you've thought through absolutely everything in advance and that you know exactly where everything's going to go, because it's really difficult and really expensive to do things later, as you'll see. So if we have a look at the boiler first, we needed to decide where the boiler's going because all the pipes obviously run down from the boiler and underneath the floor. and you need to start working out where you're going to put your radiators and how those pipes are going to flow and return. Now this is the kitchen layout. You can see we've marked up on the wall where the fridge is going and the sink and the dishwasher and the other sink. So we've already started planning. So you can see cables coming up here. We've got pipe work. Everything needs to be designed in advance. I think that's the key message from this video, is that when you're looking at stuff on a piece of paper, you need to plan everything in exact detail so that when the builders get on site and start plotting everything out, they know exactly where everything's going to go and how to construct things on an ongoing basis. So you can see we've had to drill through some of these joists to pass the cables through, and that's much easier to do now at this stage so that everything can be done before we close the ceiling up, before all the boards go on it and all is plastered and it disappears forever. So jumping forward a little bit here, you can see that we've now put some plasterboard on the ceiling and the floor is starting to be closed up as well. So already we're having to seal everything in and get it all finished. We are now ready for plastering this ceiling. So all of the first fix is done. Looking at the heating, we've now got specifics like how wide the radiator is. So we fitted those connections now. We've got the pipes in place. So that will be a lovely, neat finish into the bottom of that radiator. And the same here. We're starting to chase out exactly where we want the plug sockets. All the first fix is now completely finished and in place. So all those decisions that we were talking about, you can see on the left hand side, that's where the extractor fan is going to go in the kitchen. There's a high cable up there. We've got the pendant lights. You can see lots of different fittings all round. And finally finishing up, here we are after we've plastered. So all the ceiling and the walls have now been plastered. This is first fix done. Everything is concealed behind the plaster and the plasterboard and the floor. So it's all done and dusted. First fix completely done. What we're doing here is using some of the bricks, some of the debris that we took when we demolished the back end of the extension, the old extension. We've kept those bricks and now we're using them as hardcore, as a base for the new patio. So this is recycling. It's a good idea. It helps keep your costs down. This is just a case of laying out all of the old rubble, all the old bricks. So one of the critical things when you are doing the patio is to make sure that all of the drainage has been done before you lay the final finish. So what we're doing here is just preparing the ground for the pipework. If you've watched the previous video, you'll have seen that we installed a soakaway about 5 meters from the house in compliance with building regs. And what we're doing now is laying pipes that will run from the extension through to that soakaway. You can see that we've started putting sand down on top of the hardcore, on top of the bricks. So it's starting to become more of a level surface. So we're just making sure this is all very compact and all nice and level and flat, so that we've got no gaps, no air breaks, nothing in there that's going to cause movement in the future. So we'll whack this down. We'll then put some more sand on top of it. We'll whack it again. And that makes sure that everything then is a very solid base. So jumping forward now, we have laid all of the concrete down. So we're just putting a new layer down underneath each slab to make sure that it adheres and nice and easy to fit to. So we've whacked it all down and now we're just putting a layer down underneath each slab. So just jumping forward a little, that slab is now in place, and just making sure that we've got everything perfect, that the gap is the same as it is with all of the other slabs. It's all uniform, all nicely neat and looking perfect. So it's relatively time consuming to make sure each individual slab is perfectly level. And that's why we put a little bit of build up of the sand cement mix beneath it, because it then gives you a little bit of play. You can hit it with the mallet like we're doing here, if there's anywhere where it needs to go up or down, maybe slightly left or right or whatever it might be. So you can see here, we're playing with each slab, making sure that it's entirely level, put the spirit level on it every single time, both left and right, to make sure that it's all completely level before you send it home. So it does take a bit of time to make sure you get it right, but it's worth it because this patio hopefully will be down for the next 20 or 30 years. So here we are jumping forward to the grouting stage. So all of the slabs have now been laid, everything is now done, and now it's a case of doing the grouting. very similar job to the grouting that you would do in a bathroom or a kitchen. So we've got the grout in the bucket and we're feeding it into the gaps between each of the stones, and then just making sure that it's all completely filled in and there's plenty on there. We can wash off any residue, any extra, so you can see here that it's bleeding out onto the stones themselves. That's not a problem, that can be washed away later. We've got to make sure that there's enough grout in between each stone initially. So here's the fully finished patio. So we've now laid all of the slabs, all the grouting's done, everything's dried up. You can see it looks very modern and neat. Once we get the sliding doors in, this will really be a very modern addition to this new extension. Really works well. You can see the patio furniture we put on just for the purposes of this video all starting to take shape and looks a lot better than it did if you've been watching this series of videos and saw what this used to look like before we started the work. So hopefully this series has been useful for you. If it has, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like this and other videos about property. Thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next video.